Welcome to the deep dive. Today we have a mission that requires us to step into some incredibly dark, heavy territory.
Yeah, we really do. It's a tough one today.
Right. We're going to reconstruct the mind of a combat veteran using excerpts from this harrowing, clinical, and deeply psychological text. It's called the Tularosa Perimeter, a forensic reconstruction written by Brian Scott.
And our goal here is to really look at the architecture of trauma.
Exactly. I want you, the listener, to imagine just for a second that you are standing in your own living room. But instead of seeing a home, you see a hardened defensive structure.
Like a bunker.
Yeah, exactly, a bunker. You don't have a front yard anymore. You have what you call a desert front with, clear fields of fire.
And your backyard is a grass rear, which is just a temporary sanctuary.
Right. And you don't even look at your own dogs as pets. To you, Tiger and Sarah are literally your early warning systems.
It's a terrifying reality to inhabit. You're essentially trapped in a siege of your own making. You're completely unable to turn off the protocols of war.
Because it's hardwired into you at that point.
Yes. The text we're looking at maps out how these systemic institutional struggles and untreated psychological wounds, how they actually manifest physically. So we're following Alexander Thorne.
Who's a former 12B combat engineer.
Right. And his nervous system is permanently, just irreversibly locked in a combat zone. He survived the physical wars in the Middle East, in the Balkans, only to return to this isolated stucco house at 501 Lovers Lane in Alamogordo, New Mexico.
Just to fight an endless, invisible war against his own biology.
Exactly.
Well, the author, Brian Scott, is incredibly meticulous in how he details Thorne's life. But before we get into, how he actually survives in Alamogordo, I want to make sure I understand the foundation here.
Yeah.
So Thorne was a 12B combat engineer. What exactly does that entail, and how does it map onto his civilian life?
So a 12B combat engineer is trained to operate under extreme duress. I mean, they build defensive grids, they breach obstacles, and crucially, they clear minefields. Yeah. They are basically trained to anticipate catastrophe everywhere. They look for hidden lethality in completely everyday environments. And Thorne takes this training and uses it as a literal psychological survival mechanism in his domestic space.
So he's building perimeters in his house.
Yes, he establishes perimeters, he regulates his relationships through this rigid tactical lens, and he develops a very severe form of agoraphobia that he strictly defines as his 15-mile limit.
Let's dig into that 15-mile limit, because is that just an arbitrary number he picked, or is there an actual physical reaction if he crosses it?
Oh, it is a hard biological boundary. If he drives past that invisible 15-mile radius, his system just completely crashes.
Like a panic attack.
Worse, his body literally begins to mimic the physical symptoms of an impending ambush. His heart rate spikes, he loses his breath, and he experiences sheer, unadulterated panic.
Okay, I want to understand how this works biologically. Like, why can't he just tell himself, I'm in a civilian town, I'm safe?
Well, it's because trauma of this magnitude physically rewires the brain. The amygdala, which is the part of the brain responsible for processing fear and threat detection, it becomes hyperactive.
Oh, right. It kind of takes over.
Exactly. It effectively bypasses the prefrontal cortex, which is your logical, rational control center. So when Thorne's brain perceives a threat, even a non-existent one, his rational mind cannot override the alarm.
It's too late by then.
Yeah. His nervous system just dumps adrenaline and cortisol into his bloodstream way before he has time to think. The threat vanishes when he leaves the military, sure, but that biological hyper-vigilance remains permanently switched on.
Okay, let's unpack this, because it sounds like his nervous system is essentially a smoke detector that cannot be turned off.
That's a great way to put it.
It's as if Thorne never took off his uniform, right? He just zipped his civilian life over it. And from what the text shows, it's not just a behavioral adaptation. I mean, he's dealing with severe physical decay that actively anchors him back to his deployments.
Yeah, that is what the author refers to as his sensory architecture. Thorne isn't just haunted by memories in his head, he is haunted by his own failing body. The book takes us back to August 1993 at Lucky Base in Saudi Arabia.
Okay.
Thorne was part of the 16th Engineer Battalion, and their daily reality involved breathing in what the text calls a particulate haze from the base's burn pits.
Right, and for those who might not be familiar with military burn pits, we're talking about massive open-air fires used to dispose of literally everything.
Everything.
It's this toxic mix of burning plastic, medical waste, batteries, military refuse, all just incinerated with jet fuel.
Precisely. And inhaling that toxic smoke for months fundamentally scarred the alveoli in Thorne's lungs. That exposure led directly to chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, or COPD.
Which is devastating.
It is a severe inflammatory lung disease that causes obstructed airflow. And for Thorne, it is 100% disabling.
Wow.
So every single time he gasps for air in his New Mexico living room, his body is actively forcing him to remember the air at Lucky Base.
God, it's like physical suffocation as a form of memory.
Yeah, exactly.
And then there's the neurological scar, which honestly just sounds like psychological torture. He has chronic tinnitus. But the author doesn't describe it as like a simple ringing in the ears. He calls it a cicada-like shriek.
The comparison to cicadas is vital here, because the mating calls of high desert insects, I mean, they can rival the decibel level of a jet engine.
They are incredibly loud.
Right. But for Thorne, this sound isn't coming from outside the house. It's this permanent, deafening siren trapped inside his own skull. It started as a whisper in Saudi Arabia and just grew into this paralyzing roar over the decades.
How does a person even survive that? When the enemy isn't outside the wire but hardwired into their own biology and their sensory perception. Because, I mean, if your brain is demanding the sensory input of a war zone, sitting in a quiet safe room must be terrifying.
It is.
Because the quiet leaves room for the cicadas.
It does. Which is exactly why they have to adapt. Because Thorne cannot turn off his hypervigilance, he has to actively seek out a civilian environment that can actually absorb that massive level of kinetic energy.
He needs an outlet.
Yes. He has to find a battlefield that looks like peace.
And surprisingly, he finds that battlefield in the high-stress, grease-scented world of suburban pizza delivery.
Yeah.
Which, this transition in the book is staggering. We go from the muddy, mine-filled banks of the Sava River in Bosnia directly into a commercial kitchen in Maryland.
Yeah, let's trace the logistics parallel because it reveals so much about his mindset. So in 1998, Thorne gets a DUI in Germany. He is busted down from his rank to an E1 private and given a general discharge.
Rough.
Very.
Yeah.
He's released back into the civilian world, totally adrift, just hiding out a base in Maryland. So to survive, he takes a job delivering pizzas.
Right.
But he doesn't treat it like a minimum wage clock in, clock out gig. He treats it like a high-stakes military operation.
Wait, let me make sure I understand this. Is he literally treating a pizza delivery like a tactical extraction? Or is this just like a structural metaphor the author is using to explain Thorne's intensity?
No, it is entirely literal for Thorne. He translates his route reconnaissance training directly into delivering food. His high-mileage 92 Ford Ranger isn't just a truck to him, it's an extraction vehicle.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and the standard 30-minute delivery guarantee, that becomes his strict mission clock. He operates with a level of mechanical precision that completely alienates him from his teenage coworkers.
But I bet it makes him incredibly efficient for the franchise.
Absolutely.
He takes the exact same operational standards from a war zone and applies them to commercial metrics. I mean, in Bosnia, Thorne drove an armored vehicle pushing a pontoon bridge across the Sava River. He was aiming for a NATO standard 99.6% clearance rate.
Where the margin of error was literally death.
Right, and he brings that to making pizzas. When he's on the make line, inside the kitchen, he treats dough edge locks as matters of structural integrity. If the sauce bleeds, the cheese slides, and that means a failed mission.
Yep.
He is basically building secure perimeters out of flour and water.
He is attempting to reestablish a baseline of control, and the corporate franchise absolutely rewards his obsessive control. They promote him to general manager, handing him the command post of a new store in Odenton, Maryland.
But managing a store is brutal.
It's 70-hour weeks. The environment is chaotic, multiple phones ringing simultaneously, ovens blaring, alarms tripping at 2:00 a.m., supply shortages.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. We traditionally view a steady civilian job as a path to healing, right? It's supposed to be how veterans reintegrate.
Right.
But you have to ask, was this corporate franchise actually exploiting his trauma? Or are they taking a man desperate for a secure perimeter and weaponizing his hyper-vigilance for profit right up until his engine literally tore itself apart?
The text strongly suggests that. The corporate structure basically absorbed his trauma as productivity until it became unmanageable. To Thorne, the chaos of the kitchen wasn't just workplace stress, it was an incoming assault.
His body reacted exactly as it would in a free-fire zone.
Yes. The author notes that the cicada sound in his head began to shriek louder and louder. The stress perfectly mimicked combat, eroding his psychological defenses until November 2012.
And that's the breakdown.
Yeah.
It's a Friday night rush, the ticket screen is full, the noise is at critical mass, and a new driver accidentally bumps into Thorne at the cut table. It's just a routine physical bump in a crowded space.
But for Thorne, that physical contact triggers a massive flashback to the crowded markets of Bosnia and the terror of a suicide vest threat.
And this goes back to what we discussed about the amygdala, right?
Exactly. The rational brain knows it's just a teenager in a pizza shop, but the amygdala registers a physical impact in a high-stress environment and just screams lethal threat.
So the aggression surges to the surface.
Yes. The aggression that had been dormant just explodes. Thorne kicks a 50-gallon trash can completely across the room. He destroys a stack of dough trays. He roars at the terrified staff. And just like that, the corporate machine that benefited from his hypervigilance for years
Just ejects him
immediately.
He is terminated. Script of his command sent back to zero. And this is when his 15-mile limit begins to shrink dramatically. Without his command post, his perimeter collapses inward.
He's completely adrift again.
Yeah. And the only reason he doesn't face total disintegration at this point in the timeline is because of a human tether. His father, Robert Thorne.
Robert is such a vital figure in this forensic reconstruction. He is a retired Navy AW-1, which is an aviation warfare systems operator.
Okay.
For 20 years, Robert sat in the back of P-3 Orion aircraft, just staring at acoustic screens, hunting for the magnetic anomalies of Soviet submarines beneath the ocean.
He's a sonar operator. He spent his whole career finding things that do not want to be found, and he becomes Alex's acoustic anchor.
Exactly. Robert understands what he calls the sensor ghost. When Alex confesses that he feels like he's constantly vibrating, that his internal engine is still running even in the dead quiet of a Maryland basement, Robert taps his own temple.
He doesn't dismiss it.
No, he validates the experience. He explains that he used to hear the phantom pings of the passive sonar in his sleep for years after he retired. He tells his son, "Your gain is turned up too high. You need to recalibrate."
That is an incredible form of logistical love. Robert doesn't offer, flowery emotional support. He grounds Alex with direct action.
Right.
He is the one who buys him that '92 Ford Ranger. He forces him out of the basement. He refuses to leave a man, as he puts it, stranded on the beach. Robert essentially operates as the watchstander. He monitors the perimeter so Alex can occasionally lower his weapons.
And that dynamic holds them together for decades. It facilitates their eventual relocation to Alamogordo, New Mexico, because the dry heat helps with Alex's COPD.
And the low population density helps too, right?
Yes, the clear lines of sight across the Tularosa Basin help soothe his agoraphobia. The cicadas in his head actually quiet down to a manageable hum. He is static, but he is stable.
Until December 2021,
Yeah.
Robert suffers a sudden heart attack. And the detail Brian Scott includes here is just devastating. Thorne is standing in the hospital room. He watches his father's heart monitor flatline.
Yeah.
And the sound of that single continuous high-pitched tone harmonizes perfectly with the tinnitus in Thorne's own ear.
The acoustic anchor is gone. The watchstander is dead.
Let's just pause on that for a second. The man who spent his life listening to the dark ocean for his son is gone. And the silence he leaves behind is instantly filled by the deafening scream of Thorne's own trauma.
It's unbearable.
Thorne feels a physical snap in his chest. He leaves the hospital, retreats to his fortress at 501 Lover's Lane, orders the blinds closed, and barricades himself inside.
The psychological defensive line shatters completely. And this raises a really profound systemic critique within the text, because Thorne fought for years, filing endless claims, attending dehumanizing evaluations, where medical contractors typed without even looking at him.
Just fighting the bureaucracy.
Yes, going before an administrative law judge just to be officially certified as broken by the VA, the Department of Veterans Affairs.
Right, and he eventually wins the financial war. He receives a 100% permanent and total disability rating. So what does this all mean? The systemic void still remained. There was no actual institutional extraction for him, only his father.
Only his father.
If the entire psychological defensive line of a highly trained combat engineer rests solely on the shoulders of one retired Navy veteran, what does that reveal about the catastrophic failure of our support systems?
It reveals a system that processes human beings as administrative anomalies rather than casualties of war. When the institutional safety net is practically non-existent, the burden of daily survival falls entirely on the individual.
And whatever fragile human connections they can maintain?
Right. And when those connections inevitably sever, the result is a kinetic breach.
Which brings us to the harrowing, honestly surreal climax of the text. Without his anchor, the Tularosa Perimeter collapses entirely. Thorne is driven by a profound delusion that he calls the extraction protocol.
He believes he's found coordinates hidden in the metadata of a redacted VA CD-ROM.
So he leaves his wife, Maria, behind. He violates his strict 15-mile limit, pushing through the agonizing physical suffocation of his COPD and a massive panic attack just to execute one final mission.
His physical journey out of Alamogordo directly mirrors his psychological descent. He drives his Ranger up into the Sacramento mountains.
And he's treating everyday things as threats again.
Absolutely. He treats a standard tourist tunnel in Cloudcroft as a sniper choke point, physically holding his breath until he breaches the other side. He traverses the empty, haunting stretch of the Badlands, treating the New Mexico scrub brush as the zone of separation in the Balkans.
The author notes he is scanning every single culvert on the highway for IEDs, improvised explosive devices. He is fully back in the combat zone.
He really is.
And his destination is tragically symbolic. He drives to the Llano Estacado, which is a vast, desolate mesa east of Roswell, to an abandoned subterranean Cold War Atlas F missile silo.
It is literally a buried concrete coffin, a rusted scar in the earth.
It's the ultimate physical manifestation of his sensory architecture. He descends into the silo, into the dark, crushing weight of this concrete womb, and there, in the pitch black, he finally confronts the Redacted Man.
The Redacted Man is a hallucination.
Right.
He's born from two things: the redacted medical files Thorne obsessed over, and a fatal civilian mine explosion he witnessed at McGovern Base in 1997.
Thorne vividly remembers watching a civilian step on a landmine, watching the physics of military explosives instantly dismantle a human being into what they call red mist.
Yeah, and the figure waiting for him in the silo wears a 1997 battle dress uniform. But his face is just a physical black bar, a glitch in reality hovering in the dark.
The dialogue between them is the absolute core of Brian Scott's forensic reconstruction. Thorne tells the Redacted Man that he did his job. He cleared the lane. He maintained the 99.6% clearance rate.
But the Redacted Man replies, "You cleared the ground. But you absorbed the kinetic energy. You think the ground is a repository of hidden energy? You are the repository."
Wow. He realizes that he is the bomb. He drove 80 miles outside his safety zone to find an extraction point, only to realize there is no extraction.
The Redacted Man tells him he is the engineer of his own siege.
So Thorne executes what he calls a chain matrix, which is a mental clearing charge. In engineering, a clearing charge is used to blow an obstacle wide open.
Right.
Thorne applies that physical explosive concept to his own psychology. He screams, releasing 20 years of pure condensed panic into the concrete walls of the missile silo. And for a moment, the cicadas in his head actually stop.
It's just silence.
Just silence in the dust. I have to ask you, is this moment of silence in the silo an actual moment of peace? Or is it the final permanent sealing of his psychological tomb?
You know, that is the most haunting question left by the text. The author clinically refers to it as a temporary masking, a sonic pressure level change. But for Thorne, sitting in the concrete dust, his back to the wall, miles from his home, the route feels clear.
But it's an illusion.
The reality is that his isolation is now absolute. He has severed all ties to his wife, his home, his civilian life. He has retreated into the deepest, darkest bunker imaginable.
Yeah.
The silence might feel like peace to him in that singular moment, but it is the peace of the grave. He has finally become the static defense he always believed himself to be.
Friction holding back energy. That's how he viewed himself. He was the barrier keeping the explosion contained.
Yeah.
And that leaves us with a lingering, heavy realization. If our society is quietly populated by thousands of veterans like Alexander Thorne,
Yeah, holding it all in.
men and women serving as their own isolated, unanchored bunkers, holding back the kinetic energy of caste wars in their living rooms and pizza kitchens in the quiet corners of our cities, what happens when their perimeters finally breach?
It forces us to ask who is bearing the true ongoing cost of these conflicts decades after the treaties are signed. If the formal support systems are moving at the speed of a glacier and the burden falls to aging parents or exhausted spouses, what happens when the last anchor snaps?
Who is monitoring our collective sonar? It's a question we all need to sit with long after this audio stops. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the Tularosa Perimeter. Imagine, again, standing in your living room searching for a threat that will never arrive, listening to a siren that will never stop. Until next time.